So when I started playing Recore, I knew it had some criticisms, but I couldn't understand why all the critics gave it such low review scores. When I looked into it, I realized I was playing the definitive edition instead of the original copy of the game. So I did what any normal person would do. I tracked down a copy of the collector's edition that came with the base game, turned off the Wi-Fi to my Xbox so it wouldn't update, and started playing a completely less finished version of the game so I could understand why the critics didn't like it. What's wrong with me? When I first saw the trailer to Recore, it honestly looked like a Microsoft exclusive that could get me to buy an Xbox One. The trailer didn't show any gameplay, but the setting, the robot dog, and the whole robots lost to the sands of time aesthetic really piqued my interest. So when I finally popped in a copy of that base game, I found out that the reviewers were right about the day one edition of the game. Point number one, load times are insane. When you die, instead of just respawning, it reloads the whole area, and it gives you just enough time to think, why am I still playing this game? Point two, the fast travel system. It only lets you go back to your ship from the pause menu, instead of letting you fast travel to the other points on the map. And this leads us back to point one. The load times are insane to get back to your ship, sometimes taking a full minute. Point three, collectibles. You collect a lot of things pretty fast in Recore, and to clear out your inventory in order to collect more, you have to travel all the way back to your ship, which really breaks the momentum of exploration. I know I mentioned load times in all 3 points, but holy did they really bring down the pacing. In an open world game that has a vast map that's just begging to be explored, you have to constantly stop forward progression in order to go back to the start to progress forward again. Open world games are about promoting exploration, and having to halt progression in order to explore more kind of defeats the purpose. You should be rewarded about the items you find, instead of being burdened by collecting too many of them. Thankfully, these are the only big setbacks I encountered early in the game. The developers of Microsoft acknowledged these setbacks and worked on a massive patch for the game, but it came out almost a full year after the initial launch. The patch was able to fix the major annoyances that came with the day one edition of the game, but it was too late. They fixed the load times to be at a normal rate, and instead of reloading the entire map, it just respawns you at your last checkpoint when you die now. You can now fast travel from any point on the map screen, and they also added some new fast travel points. From these new fast travel points, you can now swap out your inventory and select the crew that you need for your journey. This eliminates the headache of having to go back to your ship, which killed the pacing before the update. There is also a gigantic new area, and they finally added the 5th and final robot, which wasn't there to begin with. The robot was on the cover of the box, and you could even find parts of him in the world before he was even in the game. It's details like these that point to the game being rushed out the door before it was finished. But the developers did right by the people that bought the original game, by finally finishing it and giving the update out for free to the people that already bought the game. With all the updates and fixes downloaded, I wanted to see what the final version of the game looked like and give a definitive review on Recore. So let's start with story. Recore has no story. I mean, it does, but it doesn't do anything to actually elevate the game. Quick recap. Joel and her robot dog Mac find a shiny object called a prismatic core. The local douche, Victor, wants these shiny objects for some reason. Joel meets a person named Kai, and when he sees the shiny objects, he urges her to go to the giant tower conveniently located in the middle of the map. At the tower, Victor shows up and kills Kai, but not really. Why would we expect a story that has emotional weight to it? Joel enters the tower, kills Victor, and the shiny objects save the day. I've had better stories told to me on the backs of cereal boxes. Ooh, a maze. But hey, the game doesn't have to have a good story if the rest of it's good. There's still hope. Combat is very simple, but simple can be good. Your one and only gun, rapid fire, is a constant stream of energy that slowly depletes and gets less accurate the longer you hold the trigger. To reload and increase your accuracy, you have to stop firing altogether and it will gradually reset. This was a good design choice in theory, because it has the player keep track of multiple things at once while also avoiding enemies. It makes a simple mechanic not get repetitive too quickly because it adds some complexity to each encounter. Your gun only has a primary fire and a secondary burst, but it also has 4 different colors of ammunition that you can use. Basically, combat boils down to jumping around and dodging enemies while switching your ammo color to maximize damage. All the 4 different ammo colors fire at exactly the same rate though, and it would have been nice to have different firing styles just to change it up slightly. Some variety would have definitely gone a long way though, like have a 3-round burst or an ammo that fires at a slower rate but does more damage. The lack of variety in the gunplay leads the encounters to become boring and repetitive very, very quickly. It's exactly like those 3-hit button masher games where you hit the button and it does the same 3 inputs every time. But in Recore, you just hold down the shoot button until your accuracy goes down, let go of the button, and then start firing again. Rinse and repeat. Still, not a deal breaker. But let's move on to what makes Recore actually original. Robot companions. This was the part that I thought was going to be the most interesting when I originally saw the trailer for this game, but it actually falls in line with the rest of the game. You have 5 robots at your disposal, but only 3 are necessary to complete the game. It should essentially be 2 because the big armed robot named Duncan literally only breaks like 2 things in the game that block your progression. It's just a button prompt and that's it. What really didn't make sense was that you can only have 2 of the 5 robots in your party at a time. So if you don't have the specific one, when you come across an area that you need it to go forward, you have to go back all the way to a fast travel point in order to swap them out. Essentially, these robots create more roadblocks than they actually clear. The only one of them that's actually fleshed out is Seth, who's the spider robot that's used for some amazing traversal puzzles. That's honestly the most fun I had with the game, was finding an optional traversal puzzle that used the spider's mechanics to its full potential. But they're not only used for puzzles and traversals, they're also used in combat. But just like your gun, they have a basic attack and then a special move that sometimes helps out in combat. With having to swap between your different robots, it can really take the pacing and screech it to a halt. There is no downside to having all the robots with you at once, but limiting which ones you can use just adds to the padding of the game. No, this game isn't terrible, because it actually does something great with its traversal mechanics. Here's the one aspect of the game that actually sets it apart from other platforming games. Yeah, you have a double jump and a dash, but the game actually uses these to its full potential. There are these little dungeon areas all over the world, and they kind of remind me of the shrines in Breath of the Wild. Each one is a little different, with ones being focused on combat and some being focused on traversal. The traversal ones are filled with force fields and floating platforms that really test you on your skills. They also have these floating rings that reset your double jump and your dash if you go through it midair. These parts are really where I had the most fun with Recore. The game testing me on my reflexes and my timing was far better than the combat in my opinion, because there's an actual variety to the traversal that's not really found in the combat. They even incorporated the spider robot in some of the traversal aspects that make for some amazing cinematic scenes. Just look at this footage behind me. In my opinion, this is where Recore shined, and the only downside to the traversal is there wasn't enough of it. These are all the basics of Recore, and what comes out of it is a game that really does balance combat, traversal, and exploration very well, but it only makes the traversal interesting. If I stopped right now, this would be an average game that really doesn't live up to its potential, but I can't stop because I have to talk about the late game areas. Late game padding. Speaking of the late game, remember when I said this game felt rushed? It's details like these that point to the game being rushed out the door before it was finished. I did say that. Well, that is no more evident than the last third of the game. When you enter the last giant area of the game, it points you in the direction of the giant tower located in the middle of the map. You start going that way, and if you've only been following the story missions and doing nothing else, you're likely to get two-shotted by the enemies in this area and die multiple times. These enemies do not scale with you, and you'll have to grind up your level in order to even stand a chance. Also, to get into the final area, you needed 15 shiny objects, and I only had 9 at the time. So again, I had to stop my forward momentum in order to search around and find more shiny objects in order to open up the door. Once I finally found enough shiny objects, it was off to the final area, and this is where everything falls apart. The final tower has multiple floors, and to access even one of them, you have to have a total of 30 cores. In the original release, the final floor needed you to have 45 prismatic cores in order to beat the final boss. And if it was still like that, I would not have beaten this game. Once I finally got into the tower, I realized exactly what it was. An asinine gauntlet of bullshit that is made to test your patience more than your skill. How can anyone find this shit fun? Each floor has multiple sections of combat and traversal, and it really is conflicting to me. You go through some of the most amazing traversal sections, but they just lead you to the gauntlets of bullshit. This makes me not want to go through the part I enjoy, because it leads me to the part that I hate. These arenas are the worst aspect of this game by far. They throw wave after wave, 3 of the hardest enemies in the game at you, and it's a genuine challenge to beat these enemies even when you're the same level as them. But since you're finally in an arena that's closed off, you can see just how unfair these enemies are. First off are these charging dogs that stun you when you get hit, and their charge up move tracks to your exact position. So in this scenario, I try to escape but get rammed, which stuns me, and then shot, which stuns me again, and then finished off by the wind up move that you briefly see for a split second. I had 0 chances to actually escape that interaction, but it's my fault for getting hit in the first place. After 4 attempts, I finally get to fight the ground pounding gorillas that, shocker, stuns you when you get hit. I dodge their fire path, but even slightly touching the giant ape stuns me, and when I hit the ground, I get shit-fisted and then burned by the gorilla's ring of fire. Luckily for me, I get to start the whole interaction over again. Fucking infuriating. I just recently watched the No Clip podcast with Hugo Martin, the director of Doom Eternal, and he says exactly what these developers did wrong.
How do you ensure that somebody gets frustrated and they don't just put the controller away?
This is critical. You have to feel like the game didn't screw you over. You messed up. You have to know why you messed up, where you messed up. And if that's the case and you know it's on you, then you're highly motivated to go back. Like, if it's the game that you feel like screwed you, where you were like, what the fuck? Like, dude spawned behind me, hit scan weapons. Like, what am I supposed to do? You won't want to die. Well, I shouldn't say that, but like, you'd be less likely to want to dive in.
Less than 3% of people that actually play Recore beat it. And compared to another game that has unfair difficulty spikes, Ori has a 16% completion rating. The more I think about this game, it really just comes down to a lack of variety in the gameplay mechanics. It just feels like the variety was hidden behind having to go back to your ship to clear out your inventory and to swap out your robots. With the ability to do that anywhere now, it really just shows the lack of depth in the gameplay mechanics. The mechanic of having to go back and forth between fast travel points in order to swap out your robots was a bad design choice, because it ruins the enjoyment of discovering something new. You really should have access to all the robots at once in order to keep the pacing from nosediving and to eliminate some unneeded padding. I didn't even touch on how the abundance of collectibles are only used to upgrade your robot's skills and to craft different parts for them. Since you collect so much stuff that really doesn't get used, what is keeping me interested in this game? The story is generic, the combat is repetitive and boring with each encounter, and the traversal was amazing, but there wasn't enough of it. Even after a massive update with a ton of quality of life improvements, I still can't recommend this game to anyone. It really is a shame though. I was excited to play Recore when I finally got an Xbox, but there just wasn't enough there for me to fully enjoy my time with it. Recore was just... Wait a minute. That explains it.